I found Rebekah on Twitter. She made a video and it just really spoke to me. And I thought, wow, this woman's really impressive. So I got in touch with her and she said she'd be up for having a chat. So please do engage with this. She's incredibly clear, a really impressive thinker. And she talks about performative piety. I think that might be what I call this. But yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Please do subscribe and check her out too. Thank you. Rebekah Mui, so I reached out to you because, and I don't know how I found you. I'm sure someone retweeted you or something on Twitter, so there's still value in X. But yeah, you're a doctor of theology, and I loved this video that I watched of you on Twitter. So the reason I liked it and I wanted to get in touch, and it's so cool. You were like, yeah, let's chat. So thank you for being so open. The reason I just felt vindicated a little bit. So I've been making these videos and I don't want to tell you about all of my background because people that are watching this might have seen that before. But if you want to find out more, you can click on a link around Soul Survivor.
Do you have a rough denominational?
Yeah. So my background, I used to work in the church, and the churches I worked in were generally Anglican churches in the Church of England. And churches that were more evangelical and charismatic as well. So I experienced stuff, like I worked in it until I was 27, and that's almost 20 years ago now. And I got to a stage recently where the stuff I was involved with early on, the leader of it was found to be abusive and controlling and really reducing people rather than creating an environment for them to flourish. A lot of the surrounding Christian culture, world and church didn't believe what people were saying about him and said, no, he's a good guy. Mike Pilavachi, he's a good guy. And I got fed up with the fact that I'd experienced firsthand what people were talking about. And so I thought I'll make a video and just say my experience. He invited me into his flat. He cooked me a curry. He was into wrestling, so we wrestled in his flat. And he promised that I would start a church in Australia, and then I didn't hear back from him for like a year when he forgot who I was. And for me at 18, 19, that was a really significant moment. And I thought I'll just tell this story, a fact. And then as I've experienced it, I've realised that no, he's indicative of a wider culture. He's indicative of a culture that allows people like him to get on with it. If he's successful, if there are lots of people that follow him, they're very supportive and they won't believe anything else of him. And I thought, no, I want to explore this culture. I want to call it out. I want to find out if there are other people that feel like me and think like me. And I guess I've started finding people on YouTube. So when I came across your video, I thought I really wanted to hear what you've studied and what your views are, and then maybe your story as well, in terms of, I felt vindicated because you were saying that when people call out where the church misses it, where it doesn't behave like the bride of Christ, where people are abusive and they get away with it, where it's covered up, that's often a sign of renewal, or it precedes renewal. So maybe if you can give me a bit of an idea, and everyone that's watching, part of the where I've started from, where I met with you, of that sentiment, and then if you're able to tell me a bit about your story and how you got here.
Yeah, I'm excited. So this morning I just heard back that a book chapter and manuscript on this has been accepted, which I'm really excited about.
Great, congratulations.
Thank you. It's about monastic political theology. And there is a French sociologist named Jean, and I can't pronounce his last name, Seguy. And he basically said that every monastic movement is a protest against a monastic movement that came before, but also a protest against the current state of the church. And that's not something like that immediately comes to mind when you think about monasticism, because there's a sense that monastics are the most pious, and they're in pursuit of this detached, otherworldly holiness. And that's part of the story. But I've realized in studying the heretics and monastics of the medieval period leading up to the Anabaptists, who kind of came out of monastic movements themselves, but saw themselves as spiritual descendants, of the Waldensians and these heretical movements. So you have the heretics, you have the monastics. Both of them are protesting the excesses of the church of their time period. They're like, they're not necessarily disagreeing with Trinitarian theology, with the creeds. They're disagreeing with a church that they feel at various points in history has been, they'll say like surfeited with luxury and excess, and has now become corrupt and is collaborating with the ruling classes. And they feel that something of that spiritual fire, the spiritual discipline has been lost along the way. And so then they will have, you have the Franciscans, you have the poor men of Leon, the Waldensians, you have the Anabaptists. They seem to actually be very monastic in orientation. And I call this like a monastic political theology. And they did, some of them protested against sexual violence, and as well as this spiritual abuse that was very much tied to economics. So the way you protest this wealthy church institution, whichever one it is by living ascetic and disciplined lives in community, and that community becomes kind of, it has this vibe of people being on the same level, struggling together. Like this, of course, is the ideal. Like, and no, I don't think there are many points in history that like this ideal does not either get institutionalized over time. It gets, people say corrupted or compromised, but there's this idea, and they even say that these the church institution or the priests or whoever else they're protesting is abusive. Menno Simons, who was a priest, founded the Mennonites, or at least they called themselves after him, because one joke is that it was easier to say Mennonite than Doopsgezinde in Dutch, for other people. Doopsgezinde just means baptism minded. So whatever it was, Menno Simons writes in his rather extensive, complete writings that, he mentions things like priests who abuse or spoil or are sexually, it's not just sexually promiscuous, but also abusing their position of authority. And he knows this because as a priest, before he became a radical, so-called, he was engaged in gambling and in excess in various ways, and cavorting with prostitutes and things like that. And so he knew what kind of life he was leading as a priest, and that was the life that he sought to distance himself from as much as possible, even though like I found in my research, at least that's my argument in the dissertation, that they really, the more they try to get away from it, the more they actually resemble the original intent of the monastic or, clerical bodies that they came out of, because that is how you protest. It is not by becoming more so-called lax, because there's this hierarchy even in our modern day Christian minds, right? We always have a hierarchy of who's spiritually compromised and lax, and then who's more pious, or, what it means to be more holy or committed.
Yep. In
Pentecostal settings, there's this strong sense of like, commitment and selling out, being on fire for Christ and all that, and giving your all.
And being set apart, right? That was always a key phrase.
Mm-hmm. I find it really, so that sort of is the monastic political theology element to it, which is that the people who are countering whatever we consider to be excess and violence in the present day, or corruption or spiritual compromise, because that's what it is, even though they claim the moral high ground, that is hopefully there will hopefully be an element of that I think has some historical precedent or some relationship with this long line of protests in Christian history dating back even to the Council of Nicaea.
So one of the things that often happens is, hey, you can't talk about the negative stuff in the church because it shines a bad light on Jesus, or it shines a bad, it almost is bad marketing. So it's best just to kind of keep quiet and maybe go away. And if you've got a problem, maybe you speak to these people, they'll write a report, and best of luck, fingers crossed you'll do okay. So how's that? So at the moment, that's very, very common. So people that I've spoken to who have been in really horrible situations, whether it's been extreme abuse or whether it's been control and manipulation, very often they're just squeezed out. From your reading and from your study, what's different? What are some of the things that might be precursors to a change of how church is lived?
The part about people being squeezed out is, so what I've found more from personal interaction, and I hope to have collect more oral histories of experiences, because I think oral histories rather than interviews where I come in with questions, the people who have survived or who have lived through or witnessed different forms of abuse or violence in the church can simply just tell their story, and it exists as its own body of, and that's kind of what you're doing that's the storytelling, and I think it's really important. What people seem to have noticed is that there's something about religious settings that rewards and celebrates performance of piety, of spirituality, in a way that people who have experienced abuse find much, much harder to keep up than perpetrators of abuse. Perpetrators are skilled at this game of manipulation and of, throwing your hands up in the right way and praying with the right, and it's different in every setting, but praying with the right fervor, saying the right things. They're doing this, and they so easily can put on this costume, which reminds us of that verse of wolves in sheep's clothing, that then those who are wounded, they become favored over those who are wounded, because when you experience abuse, there's something about that, especially you experience abuse, the primary act, you have the secondary victimization, which is what I focus on a lot. This is you can disclose abuse. How everyone else responds in that church setting can result in secondary victimization that many, many people, and also the research shows, is just as harmful or more harmful in the long term, being disbelieved, being silenced, being minimized, than the primary act. Because if you experience a primary act of abuse and people believe you and support you and stand by you and go with you, that is a healing thing. But when you don't, when you don't experience that support and belief, the wound becomes deeper. And there's a whole genre of this research mainly focusing on how medical and law enforcement professionals respond to disclosures that can cause harm. Within the church, within a religious community, part of that harm then becomes, my community has rejected me, is embracing the perpetrator, and then here I am unable to perform the spirituality that everybody expects. And what do they expect? There's this term that's relatively newer called spiritual bypassing, which is just to silence it and pretend it never happened and move on, and kind of live above and overcome and be filled with joy, when your reality is that you have this wound and this pain, and it's just not going to go away. And the more that there's a disconnect between what your community expects and what you experience inside in reality, it's so hard to keep up the performance, and then you have this even bigger gulf between perpetrator and victim and the community that has these expectations of spiritual performance.
Wow, that was clear. That's super clear. And so I was talking with a friend who's a rabbi, actually, and I was talking with him about some of the experiences, because I've spoken with maybe 60 people that were associated with the organisation I was part of for a short time, that I certainly experienced for a long time, but I was part of for a short time. And again, what he said was, there's always someone that will do evil or not be godly to someone else. But it's the institution's responsibility to deal with that correctly as a representative of God. And that's what we're seeing so often right now in Britain. Amongst a few big cases, there isn't restitution, there isn't resolve, there isn't an acknowledgement or even really an apology. There's a report written by a King's Counsel, a senior barrister. Lots of money spent on that, so somehow that suggests that the institution is doing their part, but there isn't that relational community response, which is, we've messed up, and we need God to breathe His life into this situation. And so and at the moment, that's part of what so I didn't know we were going to have this conversation to this extent, but that's kind of what's drawing me to make these videos, because there's a responsibility that we each have, which is kind of to face it. And when we don't face it, I mean, I'm saying it in a different way to you. You said it a lot clearer, but that's a really interesting point. Is it worth? I mean, I just wanted to have a quick chat with you. I feel like we've almost covered what I wanted to cover. If you're in a rush, but what I would be interested in, because we haven't had, this is the first time you and I have spoken, is how did you get from Rebekah, previous to doctor, to Dr. Rebekah? What was that? And maybe that's where we can, because. Yeah, and I'll say to everyone that's watching, I'll make this a collaboration. So people that are interested in you and your story and what you're researching can follow your channel. But I would love to finish our conversation just by finding out how you got to here. How did you become so remarkably clear in talking about this stuff?
Well, I just wanted to throw in one more thought,
great.
That one of the verses that I talk about in my dissertation is, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its savor, it is good for nothing else but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. It's in Matthew. And there's also, you are the light of the world. There's this sense of exceptionalism in Christianity that needs to be backed up. Well, that there's this sense of exceptionalism, like you are saved and you have the gospel, right? I always ask, where I am right now is I ask, what are we trying to bring people into? Now I'm in a place where I'm more Anabaptist in the sense that there is this cultural reluctance to proselytize, which I think is a good, like a place to start. Like, we are not about trying to, not in the same sense, trying to push our beliefs and our sense of rightness on other people. And I really admire and respect that, because there's also a sense of like, do we really have it together enough that we can justify making converts? At this point in church history, I do not think so.
But even the suggestion that we've got it right, you should join us, even that is a full start, right? The starting blocks are, hey, I'm following this guy, and I think I'm going the right way. Not, hey, we've got it all together and this is what you should be following, because don't follow me. I get it wrong, Yeah.
So the verse says, like, you are the light, you're the salt. Like, how about the church focuses on truly living that as a community, like, and then there's a status of being the salt, right? That Christ is saying here. If you're not the salt, it's not even that you're just like everyone else. No, it's that you should be thrown out and trampled underfoot, because it's even worse to claim to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And it's even worse to claim to be this and then not even be salt, be actively harmful, be a predator's paradise, as one friend calls it. That is even worse than simply not to be the salt at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's catfishing. It's drawing people into something that's deeply unhealthy. Like ethically, it's just not justifiable. So why is this sense of we need to grow, become bigger, bring more people? What are we bringing people into, first of all? What is this place? And I think there's enough precedent in scripture to say, in Malachi, the prophet says, like, God is saying, oh, that you would just shut your doors, and so that people don't come and offer sacrifices. I think these are like incredibly prophetic words in scripture to a church, and that there's so much in scripture that says God's people, it's not that being God's people is a special position of being better than everyone else. It's a position of accountability. And, you mentioned your friend. I'd be curious about theologies of Teshuvah, which is repentance, in Judaism, because that is something inherent in the text of the Hebrew Bible. Like, we have sinned, let us come to God and let us repent and change. Where has all this gone in the church?
Yeah, it's a very pertinent challenge. So about you, let's finish with you.
I was just getting a little fired up.
No, I know, and I want us to cut it short because I want to do another one.
Gotcha.
And actually, you're answering a lot of questions that I'm sort of just trying to go through at the moment as well.
So
how did you get to here?
I would say the most the deepest kind of spiritual influence in my life would come from my grandparents. So back in the 1950s, they both met in a Bible school in Singapore, and they were both ordained in the Methodist Church in Malaysia. And they are basically, they passed away. They're both basically servants at heart. They very faithfully served, and it was not easy to be a Methodist minister. You get sent around a lot. I don't know what it's like in the Anglican constituency, but you get sent around. Every year you could be told, you need to go to this other place, and it's across the country. It's, in a rural area, and often my grandpa was sent in to solve problems with, squabbling church members and things like that. And he was someone who simply just went into very broken situations, and he brought this energy and heart with him. He was, weekends, yes, he preached Sunday morning, and then weekdays he would meet with people, talk about family. They would come to him, family squabbles, things like that. He served meals, literally like washing feet. My grandma did a lot of service too. And younger ministers would say, he wasn't this overly pious person. He believed that people should eat well, that they should have fun. He took younger ministers to the movies with him. He had a very holistic sense of Christian life. And then he encouraged me to get into theology. Like, he would lend and give me books on theology, and I would be like 11 years old. And
wow.
He would be like, yeah.
So is that, so you said your favorite book is like Bonhoeffer on discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
Were you reading that at 11?
I read that at a little bit, like the start of it, at 12.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
Okay. It was a little bit of a nerdy kid, and he encouraged
very bright.
it.
Yeah.
I remember working with him on a Psalm 23 sermon, because he felt like, this is, you seem to have an interest in this. Come and sit with me and let's work on my sermon together. And we wrote it together. And, Psalm 23 is it captures him and his ministry. So then you have this wholesome sense of like a holistic, life-giving Christian life. So I had that sense of that. And then through various church experiences, because he lived in a different, city, and the way they did services was very similar to Anglican, except they would have their Eucharist once a month.
Right.
Very, very John Wesley was a very important person in his life.
Yeah. I think that's a rule when you're Methodist, right?
Right. Yeah. There's this cultural connection that I feel when I go to like an Anglican or a Methodist service that reminds me of him.
Right.
I didn't get to go to those services very often. And we were, I grew up in a fairly typical evangelical church up to age 12. And then after that, we weren't, it's kind of hard to tell the story because, of course, people might listen one day and be like, oh, Rebekah's telling all our... But we joined a much smaller church that brought in two different forms of influence that you wouldn't think go together, but they did. And the combination of which created this very strange... thing. Anyway, so it was a house church, it was a smaller group. And it was, it started out with this intention of being more intentional and somewhat more radical about Christian life and more biblical. But the influences that came in on one hand came from fundamentalist Baptist American homeschoolers. They were very active in coming, and they were the only homeschool conferences around at that time. You just were sold the idea that it was Christian. So there were people from evangelical mega churches who were in this program that I talk about that has now been like widely talked about as a cult called the Institute of Basic Life Principles. So I remember attending my first conference with that organization at 12 to 18, and it was strongly fundamentalist Baptist that even people around me, I think, did not understand that where it came from, because they had weird, they had certain dress standards and uniforms that didn't quite make sense in our culture. So even people in the program didn't dress like fundamentalist Baptists in their everyday life. So it was kind of assimilated into the Christian mainstream, but had this root thing, which was this abusive organization that was grooming people for abuse. And I think very explicitly, anyway, so that was one strain of this influence, very gendered, but also very post-Confederate Southern American roots.
Right. Yeah.
Authoritarian. The main thing was the umbrella of authority, you obey without question. So those influences came in. We attended the conferences. Our church had an entire camp where we would just listen to tapes from this organization. We were very immersed in their language, but kind of adapting it to, an evangelical Asian culture. And then the other influence came from this offshoot from what I understand, this church was an offshoot of Assemblies of God that had that became its own thing. The main cult leader, let's call her, was trained in Assemblies of God seminary, and Assemblies of God, did come out of holiness and Wesleyan tradition. So there wasn't that. Anyway, she started this organization that's become even more cultish as time has gone by.
Oh, gosh.
Strong, faith healing, abusive. You didn't think of it as that because they were very biblical, very scriptural.
Yeah.
She would encourage children to quit school at 12 and work for her.
Wow.
I had a friend who died because there was tuberculosis going around that they did not acknowledge or even
Oh, Rebekah, I'm sorry. That's horrible.
in their little cult compound. People would go with life-threatening illnesses. She would teach them that it's a sin to get any kind of medical treatment, and then they would die. And apparently according to what I've read online, a lot of people leave their money. This was never explicit, but it seems to have a huge motivation. It's almost like preying on vulnerable people with chronic illnesses and becoming extremely wealthy as a result. but also a strong sense of separation from the world. So I would say this organization was spiritually abusive. High control. Now, they'll never say that you have to do these things to be saved, but they certainly believe that it was a sign of faith to not go to the doctor for anything, not get any vaccinations, to break your glasses and not wear them. Like kids from this, we would go to youth camp with them and they would come up to me like, why are you still wearing glasses? Don't you have faith in Christ? You should break your glasses and go around with no glasses. And they would go around like this, like strangest things.
Oh my goodness. All in Malaysia where you, oh gosh. So you've personally had to go through an incredible amount of deconstruction.
Yes.
I mean, you've kind of taken my preschool or kindergarten deconstruction and taken it to doctorate level. But bless you, you've been really challenged.
Yes, so this was an organization that we would go to youth camps with from about 12 to... And we were closely affiliated with them, but because we had our own leader who took some of these things and then also had the other, fundamentalist patriarchal influence on the other hand, it became its own thing that really doesn't fit into any other denominational box. And it's hard to explain to people, but it was very intense. It was almost communal. I think there were talks of going to live on a commune, which was very exciting to us children because we would get to play with each other every day.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, cool.
But strong sense of the end times are coming. We need to stock up food, like all kinds of things.
Wow. So
it dissolved around the time I was 18 and I started going to college and I stopped being as religious. You had a question?
No, I did. That's what I was going to say. So you've experienced throughout your really formative years an incredibly odd environment and yes, abusive, and so you went to college, and how did you then? It's really interesting. You've told your story incredibly. So your grandparents acted like your true north.
Yes. I mean, and they would see like all this extraness was not it. They wouldn't say it in explicit words, but their form of Christianity was not this radicalism. It was everyday life and wholeness and eating enough, versus these other groups these people would fast for 80 days and drink only liquids once a day, like that group, or like the extremism. But then I'm still struggling with this question of Christianity, like ordinary, everyday, say mega church Christianity does have this problem with excess. It does have the problem with promoting this view of wealth and excessive living and display that is kind of off-putting to me. And I don't fit into just normal everyday Christianity and because we were part of a group that tried to pursue set apart radical Christian living. And since then, every single group that I've, interacted with that tries to, or survivors of such groups that try to be radical, Christian, sell all you have, it almost always devolves into extreme spiritual abuse and toxic beliefs that create an environment where people perform this and yet are terrible abusers. The question about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that appealed to me, and I can think within and see within the logics. But actually, I should send you my dissertation because I'm actually actively deconstructing radical Christianity, and I don't know that I would necessarily recommend people read The Cost of Discipleship, because I've seen where this radical discipleship sacrifice, martyrdom, like if Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. I've seen the fruit of this, and it leads to really strange places. Now, in Bonhoeffer's time, it was this, and that's where the dissertation goes, so I won't go into it too much, but it was this sacrifice out of love for others that, or Corrie Ten Boom, these people inspired me to be radical Christians, but we turned this love for others and service and very meaningfully and necessarily so in the world we live in, into performances of piety that is just rigorous asceticism for its own sake. So yeah, my dissertation is almost a autobiography of what I'm thinking through, because I do believe, like, I interact with Anabaptists a lot these days, and discipleship, I think they actually copied some of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's homework in the 40s. But discipleship, martyrdom, these are all really important concepts, but they have been turned into performances of piety in religious environments that really, really enable abusers, and then are actively, not always, but are not actively in service of, meeting people's needs. And to add to that, the caveat, I do talk about how disaster service ministries there's one example that even if you're serving other people, you're meeting needs, it can still be spiritually abusive within that environment. So it's still a question I'm kind of working out.
And with that, so where are you finding the living, or where is the living God finding you at the moment?
So I've been through periods of leaving religion aside, and then coming back to it. Like between age 19 to however it was 7 years, so like around 26, I pretty much did not really engage much with religion. I studied education and media, and I researched teaching. Actually, I did my bachelor's honors dissertation in Ireland was on the treatment of early childhood professionals in the industry.
Oh, cool. Whereabouts in Ireland?
Kerry.
Oh, lovely. Oh, cool.
Gorgeous place. I loved it. And, there were things in that experience living there for a year that taught me a lot about colonialism and about some elements of clergy sexual abuse, like Father Ted, and the one priest who's a character in the story is this old drunk priest who has been abusive to teenagers in his past. And so that's part of the setup of Father Ted. And we talked about, there was a class on social work, I can't remember what the title was, but we talked about clergy sexual abuse. So these things were in the environment. I started to get a consciousness of it. And it was really good laying aside religion for a good 7 years and then coming back to it. And actually, when I came back to it, I thought I had fully deconstructed without realizing that actually I had so many things in my spirituality and religion that were very fundamentally abusive. And then it's been another, let me think. Yeah, a good 5-6 years since then of starting to work through these questions with the community I discovered online, which were North American conservative Mennonites, but people on the fringes of these communities questioning many similar modes of high control religion and gendered abuses. So together, I feel like I've been able to work through these questions a lot more. Like even before I started writing my dissertation, I would have not really understood the difference. Like I would still have leaned more patriarchal in theology, just because that was what I thought was the biblical norm. And then slowly, through various relationships, disagreements, kind of work through those questions and come to where I am today. So I guess your question is where I am today. I feel like the dissertation was this massive piece of work.
Yeah.
That working through the question that I thought it was about colonialism. Then it turned out to be about gender-based and sexual violence. And then actually it turned out to be about martyrdom.
Wow.
And yeah, so I don't know. I'm leaning towards continuing some of this work that I've done, but also doing things that are more holistic and full of life for me, which is art.
Yeah.
folk life, traditional arts, those things that actually have kept me sane,
And that story, I love that you say, your grandpa just took people to the cinema. I mean, that's such a cool, that's holistic, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's such a good narrative. Yeah, that's such a good story. So
yeah.
I was gonna ask then. So how can people find you? I'll put stuff in the description, but how can people find more out? I mean, there is so much to you, isn't there? I watched the video and thought, wow, there's a lot to that woman, but actually, you've taken my expectation and blown it out of the water. So how can people find out more about you and follow your story?
Yeah, I've always had this problem of not fitting into algorithms, because you can't make knitting videos and then the next video be about The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, they're quite similar, actually.
Well, actually, yes, there is some thematic. So currently where I'm at, and I'm always shifting and changing. I was active more in X, but I've taken a little bit of a step back from that just because of the kind of conversations that go on now are not what they were 5 years ago.
The conversations either go on and they're pretty nasty, or nothing happens and it's like being in a desert. There's nothing in between. Yeah.
So, but I still do occasionally update that. Currently, it's the YouTube where I talk about religious violence. And then I started a Substack where I talk more about recipes and, researching history. I took so along with the PhD program, which was fun enough, in you could make anything you wanted out of it. It was interdisciplinary. And then I did a graduate certificate in public history, which I want to do more of. Sometimes I just want to volunteer at a local museum and talk about, glass works in this city, in a little town in Ohio, so I want to do folk or maple syrup making or, folk. So I talk about everyday life, and I'm trying that part maybe is a little less about, that part's more about culture, and maybe the YouTube's a little bit more about religious violence. And I'm that's where I'm at now, but that could change.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks ever so much for your time.
Thank you.
I didn't want to exhaust our time because I want to speak with you again. And I think you've given me bags to think about, and I think you've said things so concisely. I want to think about that further. And maybe we can have a conversation around the community that you found next time, and how other people can find a community or their people. So let's maybe when you're not traveling and going around the world or whatever you've been doing, we can have a conversation around how you find your people online and community.
And I'd love to send you a copy of the dissertation, and just to hear some thoughts and the things that I'm trying to think of a way to share it, so that my friends who do not necessarily need to read 273 pages of academic notes, can learn, can listen to it and engage with it in a more accessible way that's not this weighty ton of, sack of bricks of of work, more conversational. Sure. So maybe possibly we could actually talk through some of these topics in the dissertation.
Oh yeah, let's definitely do that. Let's do so you just challenged me. I've got to read your book. Okay, challenge accepted, and then let's have conversations over it. That would be a really nice way of doing that. Okay, bro. Thank you.
All right.
Have a lovely one. Great speaking with you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Please do like and subscribe. Think about becoming a member too. And look Rebekah up. I'll put all the links in the description. And thanks again for watching.